I'm also interested, you talk a little bit about the different Buddhist senses of identity, and to some extent, I suppose, the ideas of an illusion of self. And that can, again, when we talked earlier about things that can be alienating to people, the idea that there is not a single line of self that runs through us, can be problematic for people.
I know. I mean, it is one of the tallest orders of this practice. I mean, when you go there, and I still haven't given up, but I couldn't let go of myself. So again, I'm not an expert, and I have limited hours of practice. Interestingly, people with psychedelic experiences, especially with mushrooms, talk about the same thing of seeing their self being demolished in a good way. Not that they don't freak out because they lost their self, but rather it's interesting for them. And I think Michael Pollan, in his How to Change Your Mind, talks about how his self he saw it changing into a paint on a wall. So you can't, if you're not experiencing this, you have no idea what he's talking about, right? But you do realize it's an intelligent person, not here to deceive me. So there must be something there. So if you're the person who's, I don't want to be confused by other people's observations, then you just carry on in your merry way. But if you're a curious person, like, oh, what's going on there? I do want to practice meditation until I can let myself go. And then I can decide if I want to stick with myself or not. But there's a lot of overlap with talking about ego and talking about other personality traits. So yeah, it's a tricky business, but you're right. The Buddhists urge us to practice until we can really get rid of this construct that seems to be destructive in certain situations, at least.
We'll go to audience questions in a moment, but I was just going to ask also, you talk about the first time that you became interested or looking at mindfulness, and you say that it started definitely with a skepticism, and I wondered what is the difference between meditation and mindfulness? What is the different kind of both the goal and the practice of it?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I would say that my beginning was with skepticism. I deliberately made a conscious effort to leave my scientist hat at home and go and explore this world, because I knew I wouldn't last as a scientist there, because you'll be skeptical of everything. I mean, from day one, they say, we're going to teach you diffused attention. And for me, as a scientist who study attention, for us cognitive neuroscientists, attention is like a flashlight, a spotlight of something that's very limited. How can it be diffused? And then you learn what they meant. And actually, it helped me trigger research directions that at least interest me, that is very fruitful. So I think meditation is, again, I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but meditation is an overarching name for all the methods. So mindfulness is one type of meditation. And mindfulness or Vipassana have been around for ages, but John Kabat-Zinn in Boston, or somewhere in Amherst, anyway, in the US, kind of made it more popular in a good way, in that sense, popular, so more accessible to people who are not interested in, traveling to a monastery in some mountain and secluding themselves for months. So it made it more instant version. But yeah, so mindfulness is a type of meditation. There are several more that are respectable just as much.
Now, the first question, I don't know if you'll have an answer from this. This is from Roma, who would like to know, why is it that sometimes a word disappears? You can almost see it, but you can't bring it forward. And then a few hours later, the word suddenly appears.
A word? Well, I don't know about a word proper. I mean, there are the cases where let's say you try to remember somebody's name and you're just blocked. You feel that you're blocking on this name, and you just decided the better strategy is to move on, and then this name pops up. And again, this is kind of the incubation, the behind the scene. So in this case, they continue to search for this name, and kind of appeared when your subconscious was able to retrieve it. A word disappearing, the only thing that I think reminiscent of this that I mentioned in the book is the method of labeling thoughts, what I mentioned before, where you can take a thought, even if it's not bothering thought, and label it, give it is it positive or negative, me or not about me, is it about the past or the present or the future, and then the moment you label it, it disappeared. and my own experience. And then I was experimenting with this and trying to bring back these thoughts that just disappeared, and I couldn't. So it's as if once you label a thought, it goes so deep, kind of, it finds its shelf on the library, and then it doesn't want to be disrupted.
Thank you for that. This is Domenico would like to know, I wonder how to deal with the mind bringing up memories of long gone times and obsessing with those memories. Now you deal with that in the book. So I wonder, you know, what would you say is a good starting point to deal with this?
Well, obsessing requires, I mean, I do believe in the world of psychology and therapy. So there are a lot of, it depends on the extent to which this person, Dominic, is obsessed with it, or anybody. So if it's really disruptive of everyday life, then therapy has very good answers for this. Otherwise, you know, homemade solutions would really be, I think meditation is great. And again, I'm talking about meditation a lot, but I'm really a novice. I don't see myself as an expert, but I do think everybody should try it at least once, a retreat. Bringing from the past is interesting. It kind of taps on another issue, that a big realization from the last couple of decades that I was lucky enough to be part of this big wave of discoveries, that a lot of their function of memory is to serve the future. So for us to prepare, so for me to get ready for this conversation with you, I had to bring back other experiences like this. Nothing was as good as this, but other experiences like this, of talking with somebody who I don't know, but I know you'll be smart and has read my book and kind of prepare. So I know, you know, kind of how to dress, where to sit, and I can actually bring memories, even if it's for mundane. It's not an amazing story, but it is practical nevertheless. So I know how, you know how to prepare for a trip to the museum, because you have been to museums. You can bring back these memories and prepare based on your experience. So the realization that our wandering through memory actually is used to serve the future rather than just reminiscing. The obsession part is not healthy, and if it's chronic, if it happens often enough, then we do have to find some more reliable solutions.
Just because you mentioned museums, one of my favorite things was your you talk about taking students to museums and just to observe something in the canteen. I just think this is a great story. So could you just tell us about what you used to do?
And this is my two older kids, but I wish I could say that they are my students. But yes, it was, it was when we were still living in Boston, and we love to go to the Museum of Science there. It's a great museum. And when it comes time for lunch, we would sit in the cafeteria, and I like to see them close to the entrance. And you notice how people that enter the cafeteria, obviously hungry, are staring. They're locked. Their gaze is locked on our trays and our food. They're just ignoring us completely, just staring at our trays. And people that leave the cafeteria, obviously after they just had their lunch, look at our faces. So this actually is a lesson for how we don't really consume our environment in a homogeneous manner, in a consistent manner, like we like to believe. Our state of mind, our state of body really dictates how we scan our environment, what information do we consume and what we leave out. And in this little anecdote, obviously when you're hungry, you're looking at food, and when you're just a social animal, you look at other individuals and not really caring about food as much. So realizing that the same scene will be interpreted and consumed differently by us depending on our state, I think it's a nice realization.
I think that realization that there is no way we can ever see the complete picture, and that to me is a very enriching moment.
Yeah, and it can also help in communication between humans, interactions, understanding that your fellow is not seeing the same environment in the same way that you do, because he or she come with their own state of mind and with their own disposition and biases. Then, no, imagine two people, one hungry and one not, looking at the same scene, seeing different things.
Question from Brendan, who says there's so much advice, admittedly, on YouTube about achieving more in less time or using your time better, being more disciplined, using your mind in short concentrated bursts, the 4-hour week, etc. How does your philosophy and your thinking complement that, or is it an antidote to that?
It is an antidote. I think I do. The whole concept of productivity rubs me the wrong way, but people are built differently, and you and I talked before about that. Some people are best at having a plan, having a Gantt with, in this month I will achieve this, and this week I will achieve that, and tomorrow I want to do A, B, C, D. And they have goals, and they have special softwares and applications to make sure that they're on target. And some people are just all over, and you should see my desk here with all the notes and all the books and the zillions of tabs that I have open. So we all function differently. So a person like the person who just asked the question, I don't think should feel stressed about all this advice, because this advice applies to some people, but not to others. And if I may add an anecdote that also relates to our previous conversation, in my lab back at Harvard, I remember when I had 2 research assistants, and every time when I had something for one of them, I just give them this. And I noticed that one of them is really messy. She was very creative, always coming up with an original solution for things, but she was messy. And the other person was really well organized, but you couldn't get them out of the Excel. They were really on target. They can't be bothered with anything that's not on path. And before I started all this research, little did I know. So I would say, I'm going to discipline these 2 research assistants. And the messy one, I really tried to get her organized. And the organized one, I really tried to get creative and a little more original and big thinker, until you realize, no, this is what works for this person, and this is what works for that person. And this coaching on YouTube for productivity is good for some people, but not for others. And we should accept who we are and really go with our strength rather than trying to enforce ourselves. I think people that are more associative and more messy, but it comes in the expense, being creative and associative, but often comes at the expense of being less organized, should just, tap on if you have to fight this thing that you've given, you should see it as a gift rather than as a curse, and really ride this wave of creativity and not worry about this productivity and other things that don't apply to you as much.
I think that's such an important thing. Again, I know we were talking about that before we started, but that realization that, like with things with ADHD, you might not be doing it how you believe is the officially sanctioned way of creating a show, creating a book, creating whatever you're creating. But if all those connections, you may well be making connections which no one else is being able to make in that environment. You have a different skill, even if it's not necessarily a linear skill. And that seems to be, that comes across quite a lot, I think, in the book, the advantages of this way that can work.
Yeah, by and large, I don't think people should feel guilty about who they are. As long as they're honest and kind, then we're given a set of traits that are good and some that are less good, and we should go with what we have.
I always go back, there's a line Richard Feynman had when he met a Buddhist monk, and they were talking about the nature of science, and they said, you must remember the keys to heaven also open the gates to hell. And I think that bit of going, the thing that's great is also the thing that's really annoying as well, and vice versa.
Yeah, exactly.
Martha would like to know, said, Martha's been researching people who claim to have lost their inner voice, usually through meditation, which seems very strongly connected to mind wandering and the default mode network. Have you come across any similar accounts, and do you have any thoughts on what might be happening here? Is it a positive or negative outcome to lose that inner voice?
Well, I haven't heard of losing inner voice, but I can see how extended period of practicing meditation can help you lower this inner voice, the extent, because a lot of what it does, and I talked there about a term that I've taken from my previous life of being an engineer and computer scientist, of signal to noise ratio. So a lot of the thoughts we have going, not all of them are relevant. Most of them are actually not relevant to what you're doing now or what you want to be doing now. So meditation helps you reduce the noise and amplify the signal or the good stuff in your thoughts. So I won't be surprised if what this person refers to is the practice of meditation that reduces the extent to which inner dialogue kind of goes on in our mind. There are people that are, I don't want to call them patients, because as I said, we're versatile, and I don't think it's a problem, but there is an issue called aphantasia, the people that cannot see, that cannot image things, they cannot see images. Also the text, the verbal stuff is reduced in these individuals, but they see much less, they cannot envision things, they cannot imagine things visually. and we are very visual creatures. So without this ability of seeing things in our mind's eye, so the result, so on the one hand, they cannot have these visions. It can also serve a good function. They talk about not being able to, or not reminiscing on people that they lost. So for example, they're less sad. They cannot mourn somebody because this person does not come back to them as an image. And they also are more in the moment. They're more mindful just because they don't have these distractions. But this is a subgroup. Otherwise, I can only imagine less inner speech as a result of meditation practice or other related practices.
I read an interesting about aphantasia, that some visual artists, it appeared, had aphantasia, and I thought that was fascinating. The fact that because it's not in there, and this is just making a leap, that it ends up on the canvas instead, or in the clay. I thought that's a fascinating extension.
Me as well. I didn't know there are artists that had this condition. Interesting.
This actually, I suppose, is maybe a similar area. Someone has just asked, meditation, can it heal severe anxiety cases that have physical symptoms?
Yes, I definitely think that meditation is a good approach for anxiety. I mean, with everything I say, people have to, I mean, they probably realize that with every problem we have with our mind and with our body, if it crosses a certain threshold, we have to see a professional for this. We can't really solve it at home. So, but it's a range. All of us suffer from some extent of anxiety. It can be really momentary, and the COVID can be something that causes some anxiety. But the question is how clinical, how chronic it is. But meditation for mind situations, it's a great method for anxiety, for stress reduction, also for mild depression. Not mild. Mild is in the clinical world, mild depression actually is a serious depression, but light depression, so to speak. So yeah, definitely, I definitely recommend meditation for this. But again, it depends on the extent of and the severity of the problem.
Louise would like to know, do you think that as we understand more about the brain and the way in which mental illnesses are defined and diagnosed, this will change what is regarded as normal?
Yeah, that's another term I'm not crazy about, normal. So we just discussed all the versatility and the diversity that we as individuals, how we're different from each other. So it will be terrible if we're all, trying to fit kind of a normal square. But yes, I mean, it will help us understand each other better. Just like I mentioned about these two research assistants, at the moment I understood, this one is creative and this one is organized, and give creative as a task to this person and organize a task that requires organization to that other person, we can understand, ourselves and others better by understanding how our minds work.
Carmen says, any advice for wandering mind and not getting much done by the end of the day, except in my mind? And second question is, what are you reading? They're both from Carmen.
So the second question wiped out the first question. Can you just say?
Sorry. The first one was any advice for a wandering mind in which you don't get much done apart from inside your mind?
Well, I can't be the judge for others here. For me, if I wander often at a certain task, it definitely is a clear sign that this task bores me. But it can also be a sign that I'm really bothered by some things that I wonder about. But as I said earlier, I really like to urge people not to feel guilty. I mean, if it becomes obsessive and you really don't accomplish anything day after day after day, then there's something maybe clinical going on. But here and there, losing yourself to wandering, I think is a good thing, and eventually will actually serve and benefit your work. So the task that you think you're drifting away from could actually benefit from this drifting. So there's again, it depends on quantities and dosage, but if you just wander the entire day, then there's something else going on. But I don't think we should feel guilty if we wandered off while filing taxes. And I think the mind knows. I mean, in a way, it's funny how deadlines can actually, as I said before, there's not much that we can do about this wild beast that is mind wandering. We can't really control wandering to a large extent, but deadlines can help you kind of wander less, at least from personal experience. Yes, and I'm reading a good book now. If I can show it, it's the American version. Yeah, but it's the same book that you're holding. Yeah, we talked about ADHD, so I kind of sample books more than reading them thoroughly.
Yeah, thank you. So we've run out of time. Every time this happens, the mind, there are always more questions than any other at the How To Academy. So I'm so sorry for those questions that we didn't deal with. As you've seen, here's the English cover there, which has a lovely rabbit on it. People love rabbits. So in the UK, they don't like them obviously so much in the US, it turns out. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much. It is a fascinating book, and some of the questions that people have asked, I can say in terms of more specific examples of the research that's gone into this, that is all in the book as well. So
thank you, Robin. I really enjoyed talking with you.
It's a great book, and thank you also to Dana for producing tonight's show, and I hope you all have wonderful evenings. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.